What makes Oskar Schindler so difficult to dismiss and so difficult to admire too quickly is that Schindler's List does not introduce him as a moral man. It introduces him as a man who already understands the world he is entering. He knows how power looks, how influence travels, and how access is earned. Before the film asks what he will eventually do for others, it first shows how easily he can succeed for himself. That choice is what gives the character his weight. Schindler's story is not compelling because a saint appears in the middle of historical darkness. It is compelling because the film begins with someone the system has every reason to welcome. He is useful to it. He is comfortable inside it. He knows how to move through it without seeming threatened by what it is. So the real question of Schindler's arc is not whether he was secretly good all along. The more interesting question is how a man who understood the rewards of that world so well gradually began using the same instincts, the same charm, and the same access for a completely different purpose. Spielberg is extremely precise about the way he presents Schindler in the opening stretch of the film. He does not give him a speech about justice, a confession of conscience, or any early sign that he stands above the people around him. Instead, he builds the character through behavior. The nightclub scenes, the polished appearance, the gifts, the timing, the ease with which Schindler inserts himself into rooms full of power. These details are not ornamental, they are diagnostic. What they reveal is a man with a very refined understanding of social hierarchy. Schindler does not need rank because he knows how to make rank feel comfortable around him. He knows how to flatter without looking submissive, how to spend without seeming desperate, and how to make himself memorable without forcing attention. His talent is not moral clarity, it is social fluency. That matters because the film does not begin with a hidden rescuer. It begins with a businessman who recognizes that war creates opportunity for the right kind of person. Schindler sees that opportunity immediately. He understands that chaos can be converted into advancement by someone flexible enough to adapt to it. The early film is careful not to sentimentalize that quality. It presents his gifts as impressive, but ethically unanchored. And that is exactly what makes the character worth studying. One of the strongest things Schindler's List does is refuse to turn Schindler's early interventions into clean proof of virtue. When he begins protecting Jewish workers, the film leaves the motives unsettled. He needs labor, he needs order, he needs the factory to run. For a while, those explanations are enough, and Spielberg wisely does not rush to replace them with moral certainty. That ambiguity is essential because it makes the transformation believable. Schindler does not move from selfishness to altruism in one clean step. He continues speaking the language of usefulness even as his actions begin to carry a different meaning. He can still tell himself he is protecting workers because they are necessary. He can still describe intervention as practicality. But those explanations begin to narrow. They no longer account for everything he is doing. Stern is crucial in this phase of the film because he prevents labor from remaining abstract. Through Stern, every administrative decision carries a human consequence. A worker is never just labor, a name is never just a name. Schindler may still be thinking like a businessman, but the world around him is becoming harder to organize in purely business terms. That is what gives this section its tension. He is still inside the logic that made him successful, but he is no longer fully protected by it. The liquidation of the ghetto is where Schindler loses the distance that has allowed him to function. Up to this point, he has been able to live near the machinery of the regime without fully confronting what that machinery does at ground level. He knows enough to profit from it, enough to navigate it, and enough not to look too closely. The liquidation closes that gap. Spielberg stages the sequence not as a conventional revelation, but as an act of witnessing. Schindler is not transformed by argument, he is transformed by exposure. What had previously appeared as order, policy, and wartime structure is now visible as panic, separation, terror, and death. The regime can no longer be experienced as something merely administrative. Its violence becomes intimate. This is where the girl in the red coat matters most. The image is powerful, not simply because it is visually distinctive, but because it interrupts scale. In the middle of mass persecution, the film isolates one fragile figure and forces attention onto a single life. That shift is crucial for Schindler. It breaks the anonymity that systems of extermination depend on. Suffering is no longer something distant enough to be absorbed into policy or routine. It has become visible in a form he cannot mentally file away. After this sequence, Schindler can still operate within the system, but he can no longer do so with the same moral insulation. He now knows what his access is adjacent to. The old language, efficiency, usefulness, necessity, has not disappeared, but it no longer feels complete. The film does not pretend that this turns him into a new man overnight. What it does show is that the confidence behind his earlier detachment has been broken. If the liquidation of the ghetto confronts Schindler with mass violence, the Regina Perlman episode makes the issue personal. At this point, the film is no longer asking how he reacts to horror as a witness. It is asking how he responds when someone places specific lives directly in front of him and asks whether his influence can do anything. That is why the scene matters so much. Regina is not asking Schindler to recognize a general injustice. She is asking him to intervene for her parents. The request is concrete, and the consequences are immediate. What makes the scene so effective is that Schindler does not meet it with easy nobility. He resists. He recoils from the pressure of what is being asked. And that hesitation is exactly what makes the scene honest. Schindler understands what this request means. To help one family on human grounds is to admit that the factory is becoming something more than a business. It is to admit that his position inside the system can no longer remain morally private. The old self-image, practical, cautious, commercially focused, starts to crack under that pressure. He may still want to think of himself in transactional terms, but his behavior is beginning to move beyond the identity he is trying to preserve. That is the real importance of the Regina episode. It shows Schindler reaching a point where neutrality is no longer serious. Once suffering has a face, a family, and a direct appeal attached to it, practicality starts to sound less like realism and more like evasion. What changes next is not only Schindler's attitude, but the meaning of the factory itself. Early on, it is a wartime enterprise, a place where labor, influence, and political access can be converted into profit. Later, it becomes something else. It becomes a buffer between vulnerable people and a regime built to eliminate them. This is one of the most intelligent developments in the film, because Schindler does not become useful to others by abandoning the tools that once served him. He keeps using them. He still negotiates, he still flatters, he still depends on personal relationships and institutional language, but those same abilities are now pointed toward protection. The factory becomes the place where his access takes material form as shelter. That is why the factory matters as more than a backdrop. It is the clearest external sign of Schindler's transformation. Earlier, his skills expand his own position. Here, they begin arranging safety around other people. The protection is never absolute, and the film never pretends otherwise. Everything remains fragile, contingent, and dependent on Schindler's continued ability to manage men more powerful than himself. But that fragility is exactly what makes the achievement morally significant. He cannot destroy the system. What he can do is interrupt its logic. Under these conditions, Even temporary interruption becomes enormous.
By the time the train scene arrives, Schindler has already begun using his position in increasingly deliberate ways. What makes this moment different is its simplicity. Faced with people packed into rail cars, exhausted and desperate, he responds with something immediate: water. In practical terms, it is a small gesture. In character terms, it matters a great deal. Earlier in the film, many of Schindler's actions could still be explained through strategy. Here, the film shows something more direct. He does not need to pass suffering through the logic of productivity before responding to it. He does not need to disguise relief as efficiency. The need in front of him is enough. That is why the scene carries more weight than its scale might suggest. It shows that the transformation is no longer only structural. It has become instinctive. Schindler's conscience now operates at the level of reflex. He sees pain and cannot comfortably leave it unanswered. Spielberg's restraint is important here. The scene is not enlarged into a grand moral speech. It is allowed to remain practical and modest, which is exactly why it feels true. In a film where the regime repeatedly reduces human beings to transport, inventory, and process, even a small act of relief becomes a refusal of that logic. By the time the film reaches the list itself, Schindler's transformation has already been built in stages. That is why the sequence does not need to overstate its importance. The list matters because it gathers everything Schindler has been throughout the film and directs it toward one unmistakable end. His charm, his flexibility, his instinct for negotiation, his fluency with bureaucracy, his ability to make himself useful inside corrupt structures. None of that disappears. Instead, it converges. What once served advancement now serves preservation. The list is the point at which Schindler's social intelligence becomes moral form. The sequence is especially powerful because it does not pretend that morality exists outside administration. Throughout the film, bureaucracy has been one of the regime's most terrifying tools. Documents, categories, transport, and procedure have all been used to erase people with impersonal efficiency. The list answers that logic through the same formal language: another document, another set of names, another transport, but this time, the machinery is being bent toward life. That is why the list should not be treated as a sentimental symbol. It is more exact than that. It is evidence that Schindler's place inside the system has acquired a purpose he did not begin with. His access is no longer just a personal advantage, it has become a way of changing outcomes for other people. The final breakdown works because the film has quietly changed Schindler's entire way of measuring the world. At the beginning, value is tied to access: clothes, gifts, money, display, vehicles, the objects that allow a man like him to move upward. Material things matter because they can be exchanged for influence. By the end of the film, those same objects have become unbearable to him for the opposite reason. He now sees them not as instruments of status, but as lives that might still have been bought back. That reversal is what gives the scene its force. A car is no longer a car. A pin is no longer a pin. Every object becomes a painful unit of possibility. What makes the scene so strong is that the film refuses to let Schindler feel complete. A more conventional story would end by confirming him as a hero and letting gratitude settle the account. Spielberg chooses something harder. Schindler's clearest moment of moral understanding arrives as anguish. The habits of mind that once made him effective, his instinct for exchange, leverage, and value, now turn against him. He begins measuring the world in a way his earlier self never could. That is why the ending feels earned rather than merely emotional. It is not only about regret, it is about a transformed way of seeing. The businessman is still present inside the rescuer, but he now understands what his resources mean when measured against a human life. That is the knowledge the film leaves him with, and it is why the final scene lands with such severity. What makes Oskar Schindler such a compelling figure is that Schindler's List never asks us to admire him for standing outside the Nazi world. It asks us to confront the fact that he moved through it with remarkable ease. He understood its hierarchies, its rituals, and the informal ways power recognized its own. The film's achievement is that it never erases those qualities once he begins saving lives. It keeps them in view and shows how they are redirected. His charm becomes protection. His access becomes leverage on behalf of others. His fluency within corruption becomes a means of interrupting what corruption is designed to do. That is why Schindler's story carries more weight than a simple redemption narrative. The film is not just showing a man becoming better, it is showing a man realizing, too slowly and at terrible cost, that the position he occupies inside a murderous system can still be used for something other than himself. If you want more analysis like this, subscribe. I'll be covering more films where character and cinema reveal something deeper than the story alone.